Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
And ghouls, it's your old pal Sight Part 2 here, joined today by a gore for fun. For another episode of Ghouly Gentlemen Horror Month Character Discussions. Yes, today we're discussing Hannibal Lecter, and in true YouTube podcaster fashion, we kind of already did this episode for a good 20 minutes, and I fucked up. So we'll try to recapture that magic, and see how it goes. I don't like to retread around all the same things we talked about, but I don't know. We'll see what comes up, what doesn't. Again, it'll be interesting. But I guess I'll throw back to my basic question that I kind of always ask. Alfie, what made you want to discuss Hannibal Lecter?
Well, I think just in general, it's so important to go over. Everyone who's got any kind of cursory knowledge of Hannibal Lecter can definitely see why he became such an iconic character, because first of all, just the gimmick of the sophisticated serial killer who knows all, can have this almost psychic influence and corruption on people, this sophisticated aura around him, who also will stick a fork in a knife and then eat it raw, is just a very surreal, very terrifying, very twisted and interesting dynamic, which you can immediately get a lot of meat out of it. No pun intended. So he was someone I was surprised hadn't been touched on before. And I guess just as we did get to talk about a little bit last time, finding out that you're quite a big fan of the character, for anyone listening to this, I'm got a cursory knowledge of him, I've got appreciation for all the things I've seen of him in, but I'm by no means like a super fan or anything. I was just curious to see what takes could come out about Mr. Lecter.
Yeah, Hannibal Lecter is one of those characters who I just got really into. I watched the movies a lot in high school, and then I went out and actually bought the books on tape, because my my Mustang that I drove around in high school still had a cassette player in it for a long time, and so I bought the books on tape and listened to all of them. And I don't know, I got really into the character in the world of Hannibal Lecter, but I got into it more. I think I prefer the movies more, but there's stuff from the books that I really wish had been kept. Because, it's always the cliche thing, oh, the books did it better, but it's usually really minor details. The books had some great stuff in them that I really do wish had gotten to be kept for the films. And my prime example of that is in the movie Hannibal. There's the really iconic scene of Hannibal, cutting open the dude's head and cooking and feeding him his own brains and all that stuff. It's a fucking crazy ass scene. Some people think it jumps the shark and just becomes silly. I think it's fucking brilliant. But that movie has the big climactic moment of him versus Clarice, and she's handcuffed herself to him, and he's thinking about, all right, well, if you don't give me the key, I'm going to cut off your hand. And she refuses, and so he comes down with the thing and cuts off his own hand and escapes. But in the book, after the whole feeding her someone's brains, she falls in love with him, and they kind of run away together. And it's such a more twisted and kind of just scary ending in my mind, because you have this person who's like, very optimistic, very full of hope, and trying to bust the bad guys, yada yada. And then you have Lecter, who just fucking eats people. And it always seemed really interesting to me as like a really deep psychological manipulation in that way. I guess the comparison I always bring it to is Harley Quinn and the Joker. Because a lot of people, when they do like the Harley Quinn origin, they play her as like a total ditz, and like of course someone like this who was trying to give the Joker therapy, he'd twist to be able to wrap around his finger. But like it's much scarier if she's actually a competent psychiatrist and he wrecks her whole fucking world anyway. And that's basically what Hannibal Lecter did to Clarice Starling, and it's kind of awkward because it's this almost like happy ending for a serial killer, which is weird.
And there's definitely, you can make like almost two different juxtapositions for places you can go with that, because in one hand, with the film version, you've got this character who is basically the ultimate evil. You can have like a more sympathetic backstory for him. You can add moments of humanity where like there are times where does he care for this person? What is he doing this? But by the basis in general, he is the most evil thing on that planet, in that room, in that universe. He's the focus of all of that. He's the devil figure. And having them not corrupt the hero, having the hero still keep those morals and stuff, is definitely a more, I guess, hopeful ending, or an ending which can maybe be seen as like, because that's what horror likes to do sometimes, right? It has this pure evil, horrifying, unstoppable force eventually do be triumphed or survived. Even if they don't get beaten, you live through it with your morals, or you come out of it a stronger person, kind of thing. Taking the other instance, though, as good of a story that can be, having the hero, the protagonist, the helpless victim, basically not even just be destroyed, because in some ways they do get liberated by the experience from like I know one thing in the Hannibal Lecter film a lot of people do point out is that Lecter's the only one who talks to Clarice like as a person, like he talks on her level. Whereas the other people in like her work and everyone else in the film kind of like belittles her and doesn't really flirts with her or tries to hit on her and all of that stuff. So there is some sense of a sick, twisted hero's journey, but full to villainy, which I always think is an interesting thing, but I don't know. I think maybe me and you fall on this line, and I'd be curious to see if anyone in the comments disagrees here. But I don't mind having characters fall to villainy be seen as growth for them still.
That's an interesting way to put that. Because, yeah, I mean, it's... One of the things that's worth noting is very few villains are evil for evil's sake. You got, like, Darkseid and the Joker, and that's about all the ones that readily come to mind. Most villains don't want to just watch the world burn or whatever. Most villains are the hero of their own story, right? Like, they have their own justifications. They have their own reasons for being and for doing what they're doing. And so it should be kind of a natural thing, and it should be kind of a believable thing to get there. You know? It shouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for you to sympathize, or maybe not sympathize, for you to comprehend why a character would take a turn towards something so morally outrageous.
Because the villains normally are the more proactive ones. And depending on how the narrative is framed, a character taking action for their life and changing things and being able to be more confident or more, I guess, just in control of the world around them is normally seen as like, okay, this character's completed their journey, they've grown as a person. In this case, though, that growing intrudes getting a taste for human flesh, not just in Clarice's case, but also just in Lecter's own case, because we have delved into his origins, which I feel like, again, it's an interesting place. It can be taken, like, again, there's always concerns about, oh, you're glorifying villainy, but I do think there's more, as long as you can understand, like, keep that personal distance between yourself, I basically think you can show anything, because bad guys will be bad guys. They'll do horrible stuff. It is just part of what their role is in fiction. So trying to make a narrative out of that and showing how their personalities can develop to get that way, how Hannibal Lecter became so competent, is he did have to get better at his craft. Like, that's an undeniable thing. Like, you can't always have the villains necessarily get less competent, because then they just don't make good villains anymore.
No, definitely, and that's like one of the things that makes Red Dragon such an interesting film. There's like a debate: is Mindhunter better than Red Dragon? Or no, Manhunter. Sorry, is Manhunter better than Red Dragon, because they're both based off of the same book, and you know, the only thing that a lot of people say Red Dragon really has going for it is better casting with, you know, Anthony Hopkins coming back and stuff. But man, Red Dragon's just such a better movie, if for no other reason than Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter before prison. Like, it is fucking, like, it's very brief, but it is absolutely fascinating to see how differently Anthony Hopkins portrays the character when he's out in the world before he has to, like, fear for his freedom. Because, like, he gets to do it a little bit in Hannibal, but he still has to have this, like, looking over his shoulder thing. In Red Dragon, it's very brief, but he's so just bold about it in, like, this thumbing his nose kind of way. It's very reminiscent of actual serial killers, like your Ted Bundys and stuff. Like, God, so Red Dragon opens up at a symphony, and you're seeing this guy play like fourth violin or some shit, and he's like missing notes and kind of messing up, and then you just see Hannibal Lecter in the audience, and he's sitting there trying to enjoy the music, and then his eye just twitches a little bit every time the dude on the violin misses a note. And then it cuts to a dinner party, and they're all talking about, it's with his high society friends, and they're all talking about how glad they are that this violinist who's terrible in the symphony has kind of just disappeared off the face of the earth. And Hannibal Lecter's serving them all. And they go, Hannibal, what is this delicious food? And he goes, oh, if I told you, you probably wouldn't eat it. And it's just all there. He fucking served him the violin player.
Jesus.
I know! It's like a 2-minute, that's maybe like 5 minutes of the movie. And then Ed Norton's character comes in, and that whole scene gets to be really fascinating on how Lecter's helping Norton find or track his own case. It's just the most, like, brazen kind of stuff, and you get this, like, oh yeah, of course I can do this. I'm the best. I'm never gonna go. It's got this just absolute confidence and chilling level of egotism to it that's really fascinating, because the character changes so much after that. He is so basically humbled by the time Clarice shows up in Silence of the Lambs and into Hannibal. It's really fascinating how much the character changes because of prison.
And I think that's maybe one of the benefits for having a horror character who is so... Because normally they do get overplayed. Like, normally after you've seen one, Like you've seen one Jason kill some horny teenagers. You've seen them all. Even if you do throw them in space, I feel like Hannibal Lecter and the direction they went through with this like jumping through time periods and not necessarily having things, because sometimes when you do like a prequel, that you can run into the trap of just still writing them the same as they will be later on because that's what's popular, or even things that happen when they come out is just something that happens to a sequel. Even the character hasn't really changed because that's what's popular. Sometimes when you write, they don't take into account the icon because the icon's so big, they want to keep it that way, I feel like. Whereas just being able to jump around with Hannibal Lecter and having this luxury of a character that has been developed over numerous books, and you've seen him throughout these different time periods, I do feel like that lets you get a better grasp of this person, even if they are so inhuman, understand like their faults, their tics, what they like, what they dislike, and them at their best, them at their lowest. And I think that opens up more just chance for stories to be told with the character still.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. Though Hannibal, I haven't seen the television series, so it's hard to judge on that. I do feel after Red Dragon they did start getting a little desperate with Hannibal because there is stuff in Hannibal Rising, which is the origin film, that is kind of is genuinely interesting, but then there's also stuff that's like kind of dumb, and we were talking about this a little on the last recording, but like again, the big marketing image from Hannibal Rising is, young Hannibal in the mask that he wore in Silence of the Lambs and whatever, and but it's not a restraint mask, it's a samurai mask. And he runs around Paris in that movie for a fairly good chunk of it with a fucking samurai sword and fights like Latvian gangsters or some shit. It's kind of silly. So you got that side of it that's like, really? Fucking really? It kind of making like Hannibal and anti-Bond or whatever was a weird choice. But then there's other stuff that's like the psychology stuff that's really fascinating. Like, again, I really do like the idea that they did for Hannibal's origin, which is, he was stuck with some bandits out in his family's cabin in the wilderness during winter. And it was him, his little sister, and these bandits, and they were all starving, and so they decided to cook his sister. And because he was a starving child, he ate too. And he, repressed the memory, and then when opportunities presented themselves later in life, he had this, fascination, this urge, this desire that he couldn't quite get a grasp of to eat people. Like, there's a scene where he's a teenager where he gets in a fight with some boys and he bites them. It's like, there you go. It's not just the eating people, it's like literally that insane fascination with the idea of tearing into someone like that out of desperation. And you begin to realize that the class, the sophistication, the cooking them up as gourmet meals and stuff isn't just to heighten the oh, he's a cannibal but he's also a gentleman aspect. It's his way of kind of rationalizing that he's not just a starving maniac child anymore. It's his way of just kind of coping with that is by classing it up.
Yeah, it's almost in the sense of he relishes the savagery, he likes to play with that, he likes to push people to that themselves, but he can't ever really 100% accept it in himself, so he's almost overcompensating by taking such an interest in the arts and everything. For the Hannibal TV series, Mad Mikkelsen did an interview where he's talking about the character, and he's just like, oh, his approach was he just dove into music and books, anything he could get his hands on, because he felt he needed that to juxtapose the idea inside of his mind that I really just want to bite someone's ear off. Like, how do I still keep this idea that I'm intelligent, I'm above these people, that I get to deserve to do that if I still have this feeling inside of me? Which is a really interesting route to take that, because you could have just gone the easy route and just had, oh no, he's just completely insane and he just does this because he's crazy. I do feel like the idea of making this almost like an in-depth idea of, okay, so what does that do to a person with this level of intelligence? How do they rationalize it? How do they get their faults into it? And what are like their methods for it? And just being able to take this idea of someone who is directly inspired by serial killers, Ted Bundy being an example, but even just Thomas Harris has said that Alfredo Bali Trevino was someone he met who had killed a close friend and then chopped them up and put them into a box. And he met them in a Mexican prison, and that was like he was just shocked by how classy he was, and that's what like gave the inspiration for Hannibal Lecter. So you got this very real example and basis to go off of just in general. Like, I'm sure anyone who's watched a serial killer documentary can know they often don't feel like they can get caught, so they get that confidence you mentioned, but that's also normally hiding some really fucked up shit inside themselves, because at the same time, if they do this, there is something really wrong with them. So I think that's a really good thing to handle, because Hannibal stories and him being the focus and being so pronounced, it is so easy, and you almost want to, just from the performance that Hopkins gives, you really do want to glorify him, because he's got that cool level of villainy. He's got some killer lines, he's got some killer just moments of just like, whoa. You do kind of get that like Doctor Doom, Lex Luthor, just appreciation for the craft, but you do need to constantly be reminded of yourself when you're in the audience, is like, yes, they're really good at it and they're enjoying every bit of it, and you can enjoy that as an audience too, but they will just bite someone's dick off if they need to.
Oh man. Yeah, see, that's the interesting thing about Hannibal that I find kind of makes him a curious choice for horror month. Are you actually horrified or scared of Hannibal Lecter as presented? Because I don't think in any of his movies, like, he's got a couple like jump scare moments in Red Dragon. He does some like seriously fucked shit in Red Dragon too, but like, even when he's at his most like just unleashed kind of mode in Hannibal Rising, I don't think he's actively portrayed as someone we the audience are supposed to fear. I feel like the portrayal of him is so in awe of him that I don't know if he actively counts, or if he actively like horrifies.
I think that's an interesting take, because it almost relates to our last one of Cthulhu, because most Lovecraft stories portray them in, yes, an unknowable horror sense, but they are normally hyping them up. Like, and I feel like that has the same sense here. And maybe that is like maybe going a whole horror discussion, because as you get later into like the slasher movies, a lot of the Freddy movies are just him showing off how cool he is. Like, it is one of those things where I do feel one of the appeals of the genre is just that like fascination of like, here's a protagonist or here's an individual doing horrible, crazy things, but they're having the time of their lives doing it, and the way you frame that by audience, you can take that in. The framing device of that, what I'd still think classifies them as horror, is there is always that moment of, I guess I'll just use like the Joker example, of the Joker will say something really funny, but a good Joker writer will immediately make you have that double take afterwards, like, oh shit, I shouldn't have laughed at that. I think Hannibal Lecter has that quality where he'll do something really cool or really smart or just ingenious, and you're like, whoa, this guy's really competent. But then he'll say something, or he'll make like a weird facial twitch, and you'll know something's incredibly off. And I always, in my head, I'm not necessarily scared, but I always put myself, okay, if I was in a room with that person, then I probably would be terrified.
Oh no, definitely, definitely. And it's interesting because I don't know if you know this story. Did you know that Martha Stewart and Anthony Hopkins tried to go on a date together at one point?
No.
Yeah, they did. Martha Stewart couldn't go through with it. She had to leave because she couldn't stop thinking about Hannibal Lecter.
He just popped up himself with a good performance.
I know, right? Right? Anthony Hopkins could have smashed that Martha Stewart pussy, but no, he had to fucking ruin it with his fava beans and a nice Chianti.
He could have just been like, no, read the book.
Oh man.
How do you feel about jester outfits, my dear?
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's what I want from my Dark Knight Returns era Joker and Harley. Anthony Hopkins and Martha Stewart.
That'd be fucking dope, actually.
If we ever do old Joker, I want Daniel Day-Lewis to do it.
I can see it.
Yeah, he won't, but it'd be cool. I can dream. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those things where, like, Hannibal isn't, like, to me, actively scary, but at the same time, my mom won't watch that fucking movie. My mom won't watch Silence of the Lambs. My mom won't watch Hannibal. My mom won't watch Red Dragon. But she's not going to do it because it freaks her out. So, like, I don't know. It's weird as a horror fan to think of Hannibal Lecter as horrifying because he's certainly got he's ticking all the right boxes, but I don't know if I ever see him portrayed as horrifying in particular. I don't ever feel that the audience is supposed to be afraid of him.
I don't know. I definitely feel like in Silence of the Lambs, you are supposed to be intimidated by him. You are supposed to be afraid of him. I just think maybe the mileage on that for me or you maybe plays different because we both kind of like the super genius, like evil villains. I think we have a bit of a distance of that once you get to that. Because the moment you start psychoanalyzing someone, it does really take away the fear of it. But at least I think in that film, he is specifically meant to be, okay, you've got this really visceral, physical threat over here, and we need to go to this one to be able to find out about that, but we're knocking on the devil's door kind of way. Like, Satan himself is normally not really portrayed as horrifying sometimes because it's like this epic force or this corrupting influence. And I think Hannibal Lecter has that vibe about him, where it's a very slow, very creeping in the back of your mind kind of horrifying, where it doesn't really click until you sit with it.
Okay. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair point. I'm trying to think if there's anything else really to bring up or say about Hannibal. I fucking love the straitjacket and restraint mask look to Hannibal because he's more at his most dangerous when he's in a cell or restrained than when he's in a room with you, like with a knife or whatever, because he still is like just wicked fast and kind of dangerous in that regard. But like the thing that's really scary about Hannibal Lecter is how he digs into your brain. And so like I think that scene, there's a reason it's probably one of the most iconic scenes in the movie, when he's perfectly 100% restrained, could never hurt a fly when he's got the fucking mask and straitjacket on. And yet he like completely destroys that poor senator, which is all the shit he says to her about her missing daughter. It's so fucked.
Yeah, I feel like that's just one of the, I don't know, the appeal of Hannibal and why he got so popular, I think is directly tied to stuff like that. Especially making him stand out among other, and not even just horror icons, but just movie icons, movie villains, movie protagonists in some sense.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Silence of the Lambs is really interesting because it's one of the few quote-unquote horror movies that ever won an Oscar, which is just crazy to think about that. Like, entire genres are just banned from the Oscars, and it's exceptional when one wins. So I don't know. That's kind of cool. It's kind of cool, kind of crazy. Okay. I don't know if there's really anything to recommend necessarily. I guess I'd say read the book of Hannibal, as well as just watching the movies. Like the most of the other books are pretty much 1-to-1, but Hannibal the novel is the most or is the furthest departure from the films. And so I think it in and of itself is worth reading on its own. Everything else, you probably just watch the movie and you're all right.
I probably, again, I'm the only one much less of a knowledge here. I will probably just say, from the clips I've seen, the Mad Mickelson's Hannibal TV show actually does look pretty interesting. I can't fully confirm that, but I think it's had pretty decent reviews and stuff like that, so maybe check that out if you're interested or something.
Fair enough. Alright, so I need a character for us to discuss next time, and this will be an interesting choice because it's one of those things where you can argue, is it even a character? But I thought it'd be kind of cool to try to delve into. In a worst case scenario, we can broaden it out a little bit. I want to talk about the Overlook Hotel. I think that'll be interesting. If we just can't manage it, we'll broaden it out. We'll talk about haunted houses in general. But let's just try out for the Overlook Hotel.
I'm game.
Alrighty. Until next time. I'm Scythe Part 2.
And I'm Magoo for fun.
And we are your ghouls, gentlemen. And we will be dissecting things.
Ha 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 ha!